One man ordered the deaths of so many people that historians still argue whether the number was 20 million or 60 million. He never lifted a weapon himself. He just picked up a pen. What does it actually take to hold that kind of power over other human beings? And how far will someone go to keep it? Power has taken 1,000 different shapes across human history. The sword, the throne, the ballot, the bank account, the bomb. Some of the people on this list ruled empires that stretched across continents. Others held no formal title at all, yet could start wars, crash economies, or end millions of lives with a single decision. This is a countdown through history's most powerful individuals, not just the famous names, but the mechanics of how they got there, what they did with it, and what it cost. Around 550 BCE, a king in Persia did something almost nobody in the ancient world did. He conquered people and then let them keep their gods, their laws, and their languages. Cyrus the Great built the largest empire the world had seen up to that point, stretching from the Balkans to the Indus River, not by burning everything he touched, but by convincing conquered peoples that being ruled by him wasn't so bad. When he took Babylon in 539 BCE, he didn't slaughter the population. He released the Jewish exiles held there and let them return home to rebuild their temple. That single act got him mentioned by name in the Bible, the only foreign king ever praised as an instrument of God in Jewish scripture. Cyrus proved something every tyrant after him would try to copy. Total power lasts longer when people don't hate you for holding it. But not everyone took the patient approach. Alexander was 20 years old when he inherited the throne of Macedon. By 30, he'd conquered the entire Persian Empire, marched into Egypt, pushed into India, and never lost a single battle. His empire covered roughly 2 million square miles. He did this with an army that, at its largest engagements, was often outnumbered. At Gaugamela in 331 BCE, Alexander faced a Persian force some ancient sources claimed was over 200,000 strong, with maybe 47,000 of his own men. He won anyway, through discipline, terrain, and sheer audacity. Alexander died at 32, likely from fever or poison. Historians still debate it. And his empire fractured within years because he'd built a system that depended entirely on one man staying alive. That's the first hard lesson about power. The bigger it gets, the harder it is to hand off. Retention hook, but conquering an empire is one thing. What some of these men did to keep it, or to escape death itself, gets a lot darker. In 221 BCE, Qin Shi Huang became the first emperor to unify China. He standardized currency, weights, and writing across a fractured land, and began construction on what would eventually become the Great Wall. But his real obsession was immortality. He sent expeditions across Asia searching for an elixir of eternal life, and ironically, historians believe he died from mercury poisoning, swallowing pills his own alchemists made, believing they'd make him live forever. Fearing death anyway, he ordered the construction of an underground army to protect him in the afterlife. Over 8,000 life-sized terracotta soldiers, each with a unique face, buried with him in a tomb complex the size of a small city. It remained hidden for over 2,000 years until a farmer digging a well found it in 1974. Recap bridge. So far, power has meant empire building, armies, land, legacy. But the next name on this list represents something rawer. Raw, brutal conquest at a scale that reshaped the genetic makeup of Asia itself. Genghis Khan unified the Mongol tribes in 1206 and, over the next 2 decades, built the largest contiguous land empire in human history, nearly 9 million square miles at its peak under his successors. His campaigns are estimated to have killed somewhere between 20 and 40 million people, roughly wiping out about 11% of the world's entire population at the time. Cities that resisted were sometimes annihilated entirely, populations executed to eliminate future threats. Yet Genghis Khan also opened the Silk Road to safer travel than it had ever seen, protected merchants under Mongol law, and practiced remarkable religious tolerance for the era. In 2003, a genetic study found that roughly 8% of men living within the former Mongol Empire's borders, about 16 million men alive today, carry a Y chromosome lineage consistent with descent from Genghis Khan himself. Retention hook, but even the most powerful man in the room isn't safe. Sometimes the people closest to him are the ones holding the knife. Literally. Julius Caesar didn't start as an emperor, Rome was a republic. But through military conquest in Gaul, political maneuvering, and eventually civil war against his own former ally Pompey, Caesar made himself dictator for life in 44 BCE. The Roman Senate, fearing he'd end the republic entirely and crown himself king, conspired against him. On the Ides of March 15, 44 BCE, a group of senators, including Brutus, a man Caesar reportedly trusted like family, stabbed him 23 times in the theater of Pompeii. Historians now believe only one of those wounds was fatal. His death didn't save the republic. It triggered another civil war that ended with Rome becoming an empire anyway, under his adopted heir, Augustus. Augustus learned from his adopted father's mistake. Rather than declaring himself king or dictator, he called himself first citizen, princeps, while quietly consolidating total control over the military, the treasury, and the Senate. He ruled for 41 years, longer than almost any Roman emperor after him, and ushered in the Pax Romana, 2 centuries of relative peace across an empire of roughly 70 million people. Augustus understood something Caesar didn't. Real power doesn't need a crown if you control everything a crown would give you anyway. Recap bridge. From Rome, power shifts east, to an empire that would dominate 3 continents for over 600 years. Suleiman the Magnificent ruled the Ottoman Empire from 1520 to 1566, its longest reigning sultan, presiding over territory stretching from Hungary to the Persian Gulf, from North Africa to the Caucasus. Under Suleiman, the Ottoman Empire reformed its legal code so thoroughly that Ottomans themselves called him Kanuni, the lawgiver. He commanded an army and navy that made European kings genuinely fear an Ottoman invasion of Vienna. Yet his personal life had a brutal edge. To secure succession, he had his own eldest son, Mustafa, executed by strangulation in 1553 after being convinced, likely falsely, that Mustafa was plotting against him. Absolute power, again and again in this list, comes with a willingness to destroy your own family to keep it. Retention hook. Speaking of family, the next ruler didn't just execute political rivals. He killed the one person meant to inherit everything he built. Ivan IV of Russia earned the nickname the Terrible, more accurately translated as the Formidable, for good reason. He created the Oprichnina, a private police force that terrorized the Russian nobility, torturing and executing thousands suspected of disloyalty. In the massacre of Novgorod in 1570, historians estimate Ivan's forces killed somewhere between 2,000 and 60,000 people over 5 weeks, based on suspicion that the city planned to defect to Poland-Lithuania. In 1581, in a fit of rage, Ivan struck his own son and heir, Ivan Ivanovich, with his scepter during an argument, a blow that killed him days later. Ivan the Terrible spent the rest of his life reportedly consumed by grief and guilt, having destroyed the one person who was supposed to carry his empire forward. Recap bridge. European power hit its next seismic shift not with a king born into it, but a low-ranking artillery officer from Corsica. Napoleon Bonaparte rose through the chaos of the French Revolution to crown himself Emperor of France in 1804. He reportedly took the crown from the Pope's hands and placed it on his own head, a symbolic act refusing to let even the Church claim authority over his power. At his peak, Napoleon controlled or dominated most of continental Europe, redrew national borders, and introduced the Napoleonic Code, a legal system so effective that variations of it are still the foundation of law in over 70 countries today. But his invasion of Russia in 1812 became one of history's most catastrophic military failures. He marched in with roughly 500,000 to 600,000 troops and retreated with perhaps 20,000 to 40,000 survivors, destroyed by Russian scorched-earth tactics and a brutal winter. He was exiled twice, and died in 1821 on the remote island of St. Helena. Some historians believe from stomach cancer, others suspect arsenic poisoning. By the time Queen Victoria died in 1901, the British Empire covered roughly a quarter of the Earth's land surface and ruled over about 400 million people, nearly a quarter of the world's population at the time. She never commanded troops or made policy directly, yet her name became shorthand for an entire era of global dominance, industrial expansion, and colonial exploitation whose consequences, in India, Africa, and beyond, are still debated and felt today. Victoria represents a different kind of power on this list. Not personal brutality, but the machinery of empire operating in her name, often far beyond what she personally saw or controlled. Recap bridge. Not every name on this list wore a crown or commanded an army. Some built empires out of oil, steel, and paper. By 1904, John D. Rockefeller Standard Oil controlled around 91% of oil refining capacity in the United States. At his peak, Rockefeller's personal fortune is estimated to have been worth around 2% of the entire U.S. economy, a level of individual wealth relative to a national economy that virtually no billionaire today comes close to. His company was so dominant the U.S. Supreme Court ordered it broken into 34 separate companies in 1911 under antitrust law, several of which became Exxon, Chevron, and Mobil. Rockefeller proved that in the industrial age, you didn't need a throne to control the fate of nations. You just needed to control the thing every nation needed. Retention hook. But nothing on this list compares to what happened when absolute political power collided with 20th-century industrial machinery and zero accountability. Joseph Stalin ruled the Soviet Union from the mid-1920s until his death in 1953, consolidating control through purges that historians estimate killed at least 750,000 people through direct execution during the Great Terror of 1936 to 1938 alone. His forced collectivization of agriculture in Ukraine triggered the Holodomor, a famine between 1932 and 1933 that killed an estimated 3.5 to 5 million Ukrainians, with strong historical evidence that Stalin's policies deliberately worsened it to crush Ukrainian resistance to Soviet rule. Stalin also maintained a vast network of forced labor camps, the Gulag system, through which an estimated 18 million people passed over its existence, with millions dying from starvation, exposure, and overwork. He died in 1953, reportedly after his own guards were too afraid of him to check on him for hours after he collapsed. A final, grim irony. The fear he built to protect his power may have delayed the help that could have saved his life. Recap bridge. From mass repression, the next chapter goes somewhere even darker. A regime that turned the machinery of a modern state into an assembly line for genocide. Adolf Hitler became Chancellor of Germany in 1933 and, within months, dismantled Germany's democracy entirely, consolidating total control under the Nazi Party. Under his direct authority, Nazi Germany orchestrated the Holocaust, systematically murdering 6 million Jews alongside millions of others, Roma people, disabled individuals, political prisoners, and Soviet POWs, through a machinery of concentration and extermination camps built specifically to industrialize mass killing. World War II, which his invasions triggered, killed an estimated 70 to 85 million people globally, making it the deadliest conflict in human history. Hitler died by suicide in his Berlin bunker in April 1945 as Soviet forces closed in on the city, avoiding capture and trial, and leaving the full reckoning for his crimes to unfold in his absence at Nuremberg. Retention hook. As devastating as Hitler's regime was, one single policy from the next name on this list may have killed more people than both world wars combined. Mao Zedong founded the People's Republic of China in 1949 and ruled until his death in 1976. His Great Leap Forward, launched in 1958, aimed to rapidly industrialize China through collectivized farming and backyard steel production. Instead, it triggered the deadliest famine in recorded history. Historian estimates range widely, but most serious scholarship places the death toll of the Great Leap Forward famine somewhere between 15 and 45 million people between 1959 and 1961. Deaths caused not by natural disaster, but by policy. Grain quotas set so unrealistically high that local officials, terrified of appearing disloyal, reported false harvest numbers and confiscated grain that villages needed to survive. Mao's later Cultural Revolution, launched in 1966, added hundreds of thousands to millions more deaths through political purges, forced labor, and factional violence, while devastating China's cultural heritage and education system for a generation. Mao himself never faced formal accountability for either policy before his death. Here's the number that should stop you. Historians estimate that between Stalin's Soviet Union, Mao's China, and Hitler's Germany, roughly 100 million people died as a direct result of policies enacted by just 3 men in the 20th century alone. A century that also produced modern medicine, human rights law, and the United Nations. These weren't ancient warlords operating in the fog of a distant, less informed era. These were modern bureaucratic states, with telegraphs, radios, and railways, turning total political control into industrialized human catastrophe. The terrifying through line of this entire list isn't that power corrupts. Everyone already knows that. It's that the more efficient a state becomes, the more efficiently unchecked power can be turned into mass death, and the thinnest possible barrier between efficient governance and atrocity is simply whether anyone is willing to say no. Every name on this list changed the world, some by uniting it, some by burning parts of it down. But look closely and a pattern repeats. The moment power stops answering to anyone, the cost gets paid by people who never got a vote in the matter. History doesn't remember these men because they were powerful. It remembers them because of what they chose to do with it. If the death toll behind Mao's Great Leap Forward shocked you as much as it shocked us researching this, you need to see our deep dive on the Holodomor, Stalin's Forgotten Famine, the full story we could only summarize here. Drop a comment. Which name on this list do you think history has judged too kindly? And subscribe if you want the next one, History's Most Brutal Dictators, Ranked, because this list only scratched the surface.